showing a few W.C. Fields films, and we're going to be joined by Harriet Field, who is W.C. Field's granddaughter. And I know you'll want to be here for those programs. I remind you of the rules of the house: no eating, drinking, smoking, or talking, please. So we'll go ahead and get started with the program. My introduction tonight will be incredibly short because, like me, I am sure that you're very interested in hearing from our guest speaker tonight, William Wellman Jr. The way the program is going to run here is I'm going to introduce Bill. He will give us a presentation, and then we'll watch the film. We're going to have a 10-minute break, and then come back for the second feature. I'm especially pleased to be here tonight to introduce this program. Some of you, I know, were here last week and saw some of the other William Wellman films. He is, and for those of you who are around, a program series with films from 1933 and pre-code Hollywood. William Wellman was my favorite pre-code director. Did a lot of wonderful films for Warner Brothers, and we have had the privilege of preserving those a lot in our preservation laboratory. And William Wellman he's one of those guys who directed so many films. He directed many of your favorite films, and you just don't know it. But it is my very distinct delight tonight to introduce tonight's guest speaker, William Wellman Jr. Thank you.
Thank you, folks. For those of you who are not real familiar with my father, I'll give you just a little quick summation here. Imagine this: a man who, at 29 years of age, had already been a juvenile delinquent, kicked out of high school, played professional ice hockey, joined the First World War before his country was even in it, became a fighter pilot, a decorated fighter pilot with the Lafayette Flying Corps, became an actor and then a director in the industry, had 3 wives, a Ziegfeld Folly showgirl, and a Hollywood movie star, and was preparing to direct Wings, the winner of the first Academy Award for Best Picture. How about that? Now, this film tonight, Wild Boys of the Road, which is one of my favorite films of my father's 76 films, credited direction. This film was extremely important to my father. He had been at Paramount, at Warner Brothers for 3 years at this time. And between 1930 and 1934, he directed 22 films. Now, he often said and wrote that he liked most of the films that he made at Warner's. Now, he was a contract director. He had to make the films from the scripts they gave him, with the exception of Public Enemy, which he brought to the table. Not a bad bringing. But he was tired of the fact that all of a sudden they started giving him all of these pictures that were basically the same stories. And this was at a time when a big topic of filming was a woman in trouble. And he kept getting the woman in trouble. And she was a prostitute, she was a madam, she was a floozy, she was a gun moll, And he started to squawk to the front office about it. He said, I want something different. And he squawked a little too hard, and they loaned him out to MGM, and he made a picture called Midnight Mary. What do you think that is? Well, as it turned out, Loretta Young was being punished as well, and she was the star of Midnight Mary. And I talked to her many years later, and my father always said that Midnight Mary was one of his favorite pictures, so that one turned out pretty well, at least in my father's mind. But when he got back after Midnight Mary and he got back to Warner Brothers, he thought, I think it's time for me to leave. I need to go out on my own. I've made 38 pictures in the contract studio system. I want to go out and get into the auteur theory, in other words, where he would have more say about his projects and everything about them. So he was about to leave when they gave him this script of Wild Boys of the Road. And he thought, well, wait a minute, I really like this. I mean, this really tapped into his visceral side. You know, the story of the vagabond youth during the Depression and problems with of authority. And these are the kinds of things that my father had lived with growing up. So this became very important, and he thought to himself, okay, I'm going to do whatever I want with this picture. I'm not going to listen to Jack Warner or anybody. Nobody's going to interfere with me. This picture is going to have my fingerprints all over it. And I have my father's scripts from 1930 on, and I have Wild Boys of the Road. And there are more notes in this script than any other script. And one of the things that he did right off the bat, the producer of the picture was going to be Hal Wallace, and Darryl Zanuck was on his way, was ready to leave, so I think they shared producer credit of this. But my father said, well, they wanted to hire, for the leading lady, they wanted to hire one of 3 Hollywood stars who were beautiful and accomplished actresses, and my father said, I don't want that. So he hired his wife, my mother. Now, they were secretly married at the time. My mother was 18 and my father was 37 when they got married. And my mother was a Busby Berkeley chorus girl, so how long do you think that would last? After all, this was my father's 5th marriage. I think for a long time my father would marry anyone who would date him twice. He thought that the way you do it is while you're excited, while the excitement is going, you get married and then you find out about each other along the way later on. But he fell in love with my mother, and for some reason she was very, my mother was a very quiet, unassuming type, and somehow she housebroke Wild Bill, And my father, they lived happily for 42 years for the rest of my father's life, and 7 kids. 12 grandchildren, 22 great-grandchildren, and counting. So this picture was very important to my father. And when the picture was completed, somehow it didn't really find an audience. And I think it was a pretty rough picture when you think of the Depression era and the troubled youth having to leave home and hearth because their parents couldn't afford to feed them. It was a rough picture. But it's a wonderful picture, and ever since, it seems like every decade people get more and more excited about it. Now people are very excited about this picture. It plays at a lot of festivals, Turner Classic Movies plays it, and I think you're going to enjoy it. So let's see what happens with Wild Boys of the Road.
I'm going to watch it too.